Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Mel and today we're going to be talking about my July wrap-up. In the month of July, I managed to read 17 books and about 5,500 pages. This includes 2 DNFs. It was a pretty good reading month overall. I remember enjoying most of the books that I read this month, so counting that as a win, I think hopefully the horrible, cursed, hating every book that I read is finally broken, and July was a significantly better month. So I guess without further ado, let's just jump into the books that I read in July. The first 3 books that I read were for my Ruth Ware Guide to Ruth Ware video, the first of which was The Lying Game. This one is about a girl that went to a all-girl boarding school many years ago and met a couple of friends, and they had this lying game where they would try to see what kind of elaborate lies they could come up with, but the one rule was they were just not allowed to lie to each other. Something happens while they're there, and then they pretty much part ways for many years until one day she gets a text from her friend that says, "I need you," and she goes back, drops everything to meet this friend. And this one, it's in the contender for one of the worst books of the year. This was a 1-star read for me. I just felt like it was extremely slow. Nothing was really happening. There was nothing thrilling at all about this book. The plot had a ton of holes, but what didn't have holes I saw coming from a mile away. And I don't know, it felt really overdone. There were a lot of things in this book that were purely there as plot devices to have one final last paragraph plot twist at the end. I just didn't love it. The relationships between the characters seemed extremely toxic, and this really wasn't addressed very well. There was one character in particular that kept kind of picking on the Muslim friend, and I just didn't love the way that that sat with me. So unfortunately, this one was a 1-star read. It was not the book for me. I did not enjoy it at all. Then moving on to In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. This one follows a girl who knew this girl many years ago while they were in college together. They kind of went their separate ways. Now she is a writer, but she gets invited to this old friend's hen party, which is essentially the bachelorette party out in the middle of nowhere, and she finds it weird because they didn't leave on the best of terms, and she had some issues with an old boyfriend. There are a lot of secrets involved there, but she decides to go anyway, and you're flipping back and forth between the current point of view where she has had an accident and she's in the hospital and trying to figure out who died, and the past point of view before all of that happened, kind of leading up to those events. I liked this one pretty well. It got a straight 5 on CallPile, so a very low 3-star, but still a pretty enjoyable read. I did find it a little bit predictable, but overall some of the twists were relatively surprising. Again, kind of toxic relationships and things came a little out of left field for me, but overall the pacing was pretty good. The atmosphere was relatively creepy, so I did enjoy this one. Next we have It Girl by Ruth Ware. This one follows our main character Hannah in both the present time frame where she is married to Will and they are about to have a baby, and her best friend April has been murdered, and she was kind of one of the main witnesses that convicted her murderer, and he has just died in prison. Then we flash back to our past timeline where she has just been recently admitted to Oxford and is staying in a room with April, who is the it girl. She is used to growing up with a lot of wealth. Her parents are very wealthy, but she's not like a famous person or anything like that. April's not the best person. She's not above playing practical jokes on people to get what she wants, and then she is murdered. This one sadly was a 2.5-star read. I think it was a 4.57 on CallPile. I liked it a little bit less than I did In a Dark, Dark Wood. I just didn't feel like the atmosphere was really there in this one, and that's something that she does very well. The ending was, I don't want to say predictable. It was predictable in some ways, but there were just too many red herrings that were thrown in purely to try to lead you off the track, and who did it just was completely out of left field. I just didn't feel like there was enough lead up to that to make it even remotely plausible. Even the motive behind why they did it, just at one point the villain was like, "I'm not going to do a villain monologue and tell you why I did it." I'm like, okay, I appreciate the sentiment, but there's got to be a motive here in order for me to buy anything that you've just spent 350 pages leading up to. This one, unfortunately, was way too long, and you could tell it was about 450 pages, where normally she writes books that are more like 350 pages. She needs to lean into that shorter sweet spot because this book just dragged for far, far too long. Next up, one that took me forever to read, but has turned out to be my favorite fantasy of the year so far, and that is Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. This one is so good. Everyone should read it. It was my first 5-star. It just barely scraped it with a 9.0 on CawPile, but it was right book, right time. This was the curse breaker book in the month of July. This follows two siblings, Maya and I believe Geyer, and it starts in this epic prologue where Maya has always been really, really sick, and one of the Twilight Order, those that are still able to do magic, comes to take her away, and in the process, Geyer tries to save her from being taken, and injury happens. It's very traumatic. I'm not going to give you too much detail because the prologue really was very, very good. But essentially what ends up happening is Maya becomes part of the Twilight Order and is serving the kingdom, and Geyer is the rebellion. He hates the kingdom for what they've taken from him, and he thinks that they are just power hungry. So we've got siblings on two completely opposite sides of the spectrum. We've got a little bit of sci-fi in here, essentially with like these constructs, and you have these older magics, the Chosen and the Ghouls, that battled against each other a long time ago, released a plague, and now the whole world is just kind of falling apart. There's some very, very interesting magic systems in here. I loved the sibling dynamics and the way that that kind of shook out further along, and I'm super excited to see how everything progresses in Blood of the Chosen, because the way this one ends is great. I cannot wait, and I'm very excited to read it next month, which if you know me, you know that I rarely ever read sequels back to back, so that's high praise. Next up, we have one that I read for my indie vlog, and that is Winds of Strife by Yuji Gutman. This one is a really, really cool story about Nai, who is one of the witch hunters, and essentially the king has decided that all women who can perform magic are witches, and he is trying to hunt them all down, especially since he believes that one of them is the reason that it's starting to slowly become perpetual night. So the nights are getting longer and longer, and the days are getting shorter and shorter. This has a really cool magic system in it where emotion rules what kind of ability you're able to conjure forth. Some people are more inept at certain abilities than others. Some people just have a very broad, basic understanding of all of the emotions. So I really enjoyed the magic system in here, and it does have a lot of limitations, which is something that I like in a hard magic system. I don't like for people to just be able to do anything and everything. It is cool that there are some limitations. I ended up giving this one a 4-star because I felt like it was a little bit too long. Yuji Gutman did have a tendency to kind of explain things over and over and over again and tell the reader things rather than just letting me kind of understand as things unfolded. But overall, this is a really fast-paced, really cool magic system with some very unique characters. I didn't love how we had so many points of views. I felt like some of them were a little bit unnecessary, and that was part of the repetitiveness, but overall, I really enjoyed this one. If you're looking for an indie book that is got a very unique hard magic system with multi-point of view, then I think you might really enjoy this one. Then moving on to some of my summer ween books, the first of which was Upgrade by Blake Crouch. This was probably one of my most anticipated books of the year. I loved Dark Matter and Recursion. I'm one of those weirdos that really, really enjoyed both of them, and Upgrade takes a little bit of a different turn on his usual style. And this one, we follow Logan Ramsey, who is the son of one of the most famous geneticists ever, but she made a mistake and ended up killing like all of the crops across the world. And the world is now slowly starting to die, and genetic mutations and modifications has been completely outlawed because of this. One day he goes down on a mission and gets injured. Turns out his entire genetic code has been modified. Now he's like this superhuman, and it's his job to save the human race, essentially. I enjoyed this one quite a lot. Unfortunately, I did not like it as much as Recursion or Dark Matter, partially because I felt like some of the genetic things was a little, not heavy-handed, but because we were told the same thing over and over and over again, I did feel like it was a little bit repetitive. The very beginning, the very first 50 pages of this are top-notch, loved them. The middle kind of lulled a little bit for me, where we were doing a lot of setup, we were being told a lot of things, and then the ending was a lot more fast-paced. I didn't connect quite as much with this one as I did his other two that I've read, but I still really enjoyed it. Gave it a 4-star and would highly recommend it if you are a fan of Blake Crouch. Then for Summerween, I also read The Resting Place by Camilla Stein. I was really looking forward to this one because The Lost Village was one of my favorite horror thriller reads of last year. This one follows our main character, Eleanor, who has face blindness, and she's always gone every Sunday night to have dinner with her grandmother, who's the only family she really has left. And one day she gets there, somebody is busting out of the apartment. She doesn't really have time to do her usual processing to figure out who it is. Walks in and her grandmother is lying on the floor with her throat slashed. And so she obviously has, even though she saw the killer, she can't identify them. Finds out that her grandmother had this old house that she never knew about, and she and her aunt are going to have to go get everything ready and sell it off. This one tried to have the ambiance and the atmosphere, the creepy vibes that The Lost Village did, but I just didn't feel like it quite got there. We do have 2 points of view, one that's in the present and one that's, I believe, in the 60s, that's kind of leading up to the whodunit moment. For me, it was just not very satisfying. It's not that it was shocking, not shocking, predictable. It just wasn't very satisfying to me. I was expecting a little bit more, and it leaned a little too closely to a similarity of Lost Village. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was similar in the way that it was delivered, so I just didn't love that as much. It was okay, decent, not bad, but just not up to par of where The Lost Village was for me. So this one ended up getting a 5.53 on CallPile, which is just a straight middle of the road 3-star. Then I read The Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. This is the second book of Rachel Hawkins' thrillers that I've read. She's written some other genres that I've read. This one follows Lux, who is just trying to get her life back together after a traumatic event. She meets a guy at a bar and he offers to take her to Hawaii with him on his boat. She agrees to go. They get to Hawaii and boat is no longer operational. They're kind of stuck there and she's like, where do we go from here? This guy is really rich, but he's trying to kind of lean away from his parents and not ask them for any money. When 2 strangers show up and say, hey, we'll pay you to fix the boat and we'll pay you to take us to this remote island, they both jump on the chance. When they get there, there's another couple there. They all hang out, but people start dying. This one could have been really great if some of the later events had started happening a little bit sooner. There was way too much domestic in this, too much just kind of wandering around this island, talking to each other, sniping at each other, who likes who, kind of teenage drama almost. And the ending just, it really was a little bit ludicrous. You have to suspend a lot of belief in the ending of this book. I will say that it's an enjoyable time. It's a super quick read, like an 8-hour audiobook, easy to listen to, so I don't regret reading it. But unfortunately, because of all of that, it got a 4.14 on CallPile, which is a 2.5-star. Just not the book for me. It required way too much suspension of belief for a crazy ending that had not very good build-up. There was just too much domestic talking for me to really enjoy this one. I needed a lot more atmosphere to have given this a higher rating. But if you liked The Woman Upstairs, then I would definitely give this one a try because they're very similar in tone. Even though I think I preferred The Woman Upstairs, or The Wife Upstairs. Next up, we have my next anticipated read of the year, and that's What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. Love, love, love The Hollow Places. Liked Twisted Ones okay, so I was very excited to read her new release, What Moves the Dead. This is a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher. Honestly, I'm not going to give you a synopsis because it is very close to the fall of the House of Usher, but essentially creepiness, algae, organisms, dying friend situation going on here. It's really, really short, so if I gave you a really in-depth synopsis, I would end up spoiling the whole thing. This one was okay. I was not expecting it to be set in such a past point of view. I think I don't even know what year it's set in, but in a year where there's still like wars, no electricity, getting water from well, that kind of situation, which is just not really a time period that I personally enjoy. It does involve a much more formal writing style, which is not really my thing either. I did find it creepy, but not creepy enough for me to fully engage with it, and it is a lot closer and a little bit more literal to the fall of the House of Usher than I was expecting. I was expecting more of a retelling or a reimagining, I guess, of the story, and it was more of a direct retelling. I think that's the best way to put it. So, had a decent time with it. I can see where a lot of people will love this one because it's very weird, but it was missing some of the quirky charm that I was expecting based off of the other T. Kingfishers that I had read. So I ended up giving this one a 5.71, 3-star, middle of the road. Enjoyed it. Didn't love it. Then I read The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. It's set in 2 timelines. The 2019 timeline where we have our monster hunter. She runs a podcast, she's been on a TV show, and it's her job to kind of go find all of these monsters, and she's essentially running away from her past, but she gets a note from her sister and believes that the monster that she's hunting now is her sister. Then we flash back to the past point of view back when they were like 10 to 13 years old and living across the street from an insane asylum where their grandmother was a psychiatrist. She and her brother have been monster hunters and they play pretend, but one day she introduces them to their new sister and says that they have to teach her the ropes. Sister doesn't really want to talk, but slowly comes into her own. And then our main character, Violet, decides that she wants to try to figure out where her sister came from, why she doesn't have any memory, and uncovers some pretty gnarly secrets. This one had the making to be everything that I wanted and more, but the execution just did not work for me. I was much more interested in the 2019 point of view than the past point of view, but unfortunately that was like a third of the book, whereas 2/3 was in the past, and it was told from a kid's point of view, which was honestly really, really annoying. I just didn't love the voice there. And I get they were a kid and I know why she wrote it the way that she did, but I just personally don't like reading from a kid's POV for that much of the story. So, I don't know, the ending was okay, but it was another one of those where it was just extremely unsatisfying. She tried in the very, very last chapter, the epilogue, to make it this creepy, oh, this is what really happened kind of moment, but it was just too late for it at that point and I didn't care. So this one ended up getting a 3-star from me as well. Then moving on to Camp Neverland. This is one of the Ride or Die series that Rye has been really, really loving. This is one that she enjoyed personally, but I just didn't love. It follows a teenager who is being picked on in school and she gets an invitation to come to Camp Neverland. She's hand-selected. When she gets there, she feels like everybody just really understands her and she can draw things into reality, and I don't know, this one was just really weird, and not weird in a good way because I like weird. It was very like men bad, women good kind of situation, but again, too in your face for my liking. It was very short and I didn't like it. The writing style wasn't great. It just was not for me. This one ended up getting a 1.5 star. Then I read Lock and Key Volume 3. It is a horror graphic novel series about a family that loses their dad and decides to move back into the Lock Mansion. When they get there, they find a bunch of keys that all have different special abilities, but there is a monster after these keys as well. I liked this one, but I think I've been a little bit hindered by the fact that now I have watched the show and there were a lot of liberties and changes made in the show that surprisingly enough I do like much, much better than the graphic novels. So unfortunately, because those changes have been made and I've kind of gotten used to them and liked them a lot better, I didn't love this one as much because obviously the changes weren't here. I don't know, the characters and everything just didn't have the same relationships and the same punch that they did in some of the earlier graphic novels. I do plan to continue, but this one ended up just kind of getting a 3-star for me. It was okay, but just not really that great. Then I started in DNF to Never Die by Rob Hayes. This is a, I believe, anime Asian-inspired story about a young boy who is gathering an army to go against the king, and our main character is like, she's not really a samurai, but think kind of along those vibes, and she has been brought back to life by this boy because she is such a great warrior. This one I did get about 30-ish%, I think, before I ended up DNFing it, and it was mostly just because there was way too much action. It was just action scene after action scene after action scene after action scene, and there was no plot development, character development, anything to get me really, really invested in the story. So if you're one of those people that likes high octane, no pause, no breaks, you're okay with a limited plot, limited characters, as long as there's tons and tons of action, then this is definitely going to be the story for you. Writing style wasn't bad. I just needed more from it than that. Then moving on to one that I am currently reading, and I'm listening to A Gleam by Raven Kennedy. This is the third book in the Plated Prisoner series that I'm reading with Sahar for the Fantasy Book Club. Okay, let me back up. The Plated Prisoner series is about our main character, Oren, who is the king's favored. She is completely gilded, and he keeps her in a cage because she is so precious. He is the gold king, and that's kind of the thing about the kingdom, is that everything is gold. Everything minus his touch is gold. Oren feels very rescued and very safe with him. She ends up traveling away from her beloved kingdom to meet King Midas in a different area of the world, but she is kidnapped and things kind of spiral along from there. We're finally getting some romance. I will say that. I'm enjoying the fact that we're finally getting some romance, but these stories are always way too long. They just meander a little bit too much, and because of that, there is a lot of repetition. We are getting a new point of view, couple of points of view in this book. We got Queen Melina in the last book, which I really enjoyed, but she's not been in this one quite as much. We're also getting Rip and King Midas's point of view in this one. I'll be honest, I could have completely done without King Midas's point of view. I don't really see the point in them. I don't need to know about his past. I don't know. I'm not feeling it, not loving it. It's probably going to be a mediocre type book for me when I do finally get finished with it. I think I am about 70-ish% of the way through so far. The writing style is really easy to listen to. It's not a bad writing style. I enjoy our characters and the romance that is developing, but unfortunately it's just not enough for me. And I don't know, we'll see. I'm going to continue in the series and read Glow because I am a host for the Fantasy Romance Book Club, but these just aren't quite doing it for me right now. Next, we have one that I did decide to DNF, but it was with a very loose DNF. That's The Crimson Script by S.J. Hull. I honestly, completely transparency, I didn't read much of this book at all, like 10 pages. I wasn't really connecting with the writing style, and so I decided that rather go into the complete slump that I'm currently diving into, I was just going to go ahead and put it down. I do 100% plan to pick it back up in the future and give it a fair shot, but it just wasn't really gripping me in the moment, so I decided that rather than push through and possibly not enjoy it because I wasn't in the mood for it, I would wait and give it the time and attention it deserved in the future. And last but not least, I'm about 20-ish% through Titan Hoppers by Rob J. Hayes. This is a progression sci-fi with a slight undertone of fantasy following our main character whose sister is a Titan Hopper. So essentially they're on this little ship and there's this like really big Titan thing and they're mooching resources off of it, but the Titan is slowly starting to die and that's going to completely blow up all of their resources. He has always wanted to be a Titan Hopper, but he really doesn't have any power, and so he is a mechanic instead. That's all I'm really going to say without spoiling too much more of the plot. So far, it's decent. I really like the writing style. I think the writing style is great. The ideas are very interesting and I am engaged in it, but my initial first impressions are it's a lot of fun, the writing style is good, and it's going to be a very unique read, which I appreciate. Okay, everybody, so now that I've been talking for 20 minutes, I think that that is all of the books that I wanted to talk about in the month of July. July was a much more successful month for me. The 3-star reads were enjoyable. I don't regret reading them at all, and I did have the first 5-star fantasy of the year, which was worth the entire month and multiple 1 stars by itself because I have not had a fantasy I have loved all year long other than Empire of Gold, which was the 3rd that I was guaranteed to love. So a lot of really good books this month. And I think that's everything. So let me know down in the comments what your favorite read of July was. Was it successful for you? Not so much. If you want to connect with me, my Patreon is linked down below along with my Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!